once again to the Norwich Bulletin editorial board meetings with candidates on the November 2nd election. Today our guest is the Democratic candidate for governor, former Stamford Mayor Dan Malloy. Dan, nice to have you back in Eastern Connecticut again.
It's always great to be here. I tell you this every time I'm in Norwich. I think it is one of the most beautiful cities in the state, and the level of architectural preservation that is evident in Norwich, just blows you away. And so anytime I have an excuse to come to Norwich is a good day.
Well, when you get elected governor, we'll give you plenty of excuses to come on back.
There you go.
Let's start first by talking about the campaign. It has become a dog race. I mean, it's, for all practical purposes, it's a dead heat. You and Tom Foley are in a virtual tie. What do you attribute the closeness of this race to?
Well, listen, I think when everything's said and done, it won't be that close. I think, as I've explained this, every candidate's guaranteed 40% of the vote if you're a Democrat or Republican, and you fight over what's in the middle. Tom has said some things and done some things that I think for a while had people starting to say, well, do we really believe in Dan and his record of accomplishment in Stamford? And I think that's starting to wear away, and people are saying, oh yeah, Stamford does pay the second highest amount of income taxes of all the cities in the state, and of all the communities in the state. And yeah, there are thousands of jobs there that weren't there a few years ago. And yeah, there's millions of square feet that have been developed that weren't developed 15 years ago. And yeah, the largest reinvestment in a brownfield site in all of New England, now looking to be about a $5 billion investment, is underway in the south end of Stamford, a project that I began in 1996. So I think it got close. I think it's moving in another direction. I feel good about it. But I think everyone has to kick the tires for a while.
And you are confident that when the end result is known, you're going to be victorious. Why?
Well, I think because people are going to decide that they want to go with somebody who actually has the experience to do the job. All of those things that I said about Stamford are true. I ran a $500 million corporation successfully. Didn't run it into bankruptcy. We built over 5,000 units of housing while I was mayor. We increased our population by over 12,000 people. We brought universal pre-kindergarten to an urban area where 36% of the children were coming to kindergarten with no pre-kindergarten learning experience. We lowered crime by 63%. We brought UBS and RBS and NBC and scores of other companies to Stamford to replace old industrial companies that were leaving. And we knew when I became elected mayor in 1995 that we were going to lose those companies. Manufacturing, old line manufacturing has changed very substantially. I'll give you my best example. Pitney Bowes, the world's largest maker of postage meters. Well, they used to make them out of iron. And it was all a physical processing. But now what a postage meter is a computer. Most of what a postage meter does now is all electronic. It's all, and it's all digital. And it's just a very different situation. So, the first year that I was mayor, we took a look at the south end of Stamford, the old industrial core of Stamford. And we brought in a company from Massachusetts called Sasaki. I actually do a lot of planning for universities and colleges and that sort of thing. And I brought them down there and I said, this is what we have here now. A lot of old storehouses, some manufacturing that's still here. Let's vision what this could and should be in the future. We got that plan in 1996. And as a result of that, we went to work. Urban Transitway, a road system in and out of the south end that bypasses downtown and connects the rail station, was vitally important. In 1996, I started going down to Washington, and I've brought back tens of millions of dollars, over $70 million for that one project. I mean, when I talk about competing in Washington for federal dollars, I've done that. And when I talk about brownfield remediation, one of the things that I talk about in this campaign is Connecticut has to change its approach to brownfields, polluted areas. I want to have a $500 million revolving fund for the cleanup of brownfields. That comes from my personal experience of learning how to get that done. And some of that is the physical aspects of cleaning up a brownfield, but some of it is thinking outside the box when it comes to zoning. I mean, we took an old industrial area and we're going to allow buildings of 20 stories to be built there. that was part of the way of justifying the cleanup of those properties. And by the way, in exchange for that, we're also getting 13 acres of parkland that we didn't previously own, and road systems built on somebody else's dime. So the things that I want to do in the state of Connecticut, I've actually done and did successfully over a 14-year period of time, and I think people are catching on.
Speaking of what you want to do, your vision for Connecticut, it's ambitious, at a very difficult time economically. How do we get the best that this state can be, at the same time dealing with the fiscal crisis that we're dealing with now?
Well, I think we have to, I'm going to talk about dealing with the fiscal crisis in a minute, but I want to talk about the larger picture. You know, I've now published 75 pages of policies and programs and things that we want to get done. And I'm the first to acknowledge that given the deficit, much of that will be delayed for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. But I felt obligated to tell everybody where I wanted to take the state. At the same time, acknowledging that we've got to take care of the deficit first. So whether it's universal pre-K or our port development, which I think doesn't have to be delayed in New London and New Haven and Bridgeport, or a different approach to transit and transportation, which we talk about, or a active campaign that I will be on to lower electric rates. I mean, after all, as I sit here today, we're paying 3.5 to 4 cents per kilowatt hour more for energy in Connecticut than they are in Massachusetts. It's one of the reasons that Connecticut's lost more manufacturing jobs than any other state on a per capita adjusted basis in New England or the Mid-Atlantic. We have the highest electric rates. And somebody should have woken up to that and done something about it long ago. And a lot of that, by the way, is expense that our state government's adding, and we got to strip that out. So, you know, what do I want to do? My vision is to be more like every other state. I mean, let's be very clear. Between 1989 and 2008, there were only 2 states that failed to grow jobs, Michigan and Connecticut. What that means is that 48 other states shared in the creation of 22,700,000 jobs, and we got none. And if you want to know why our recession is so deep here, is because even in good times, we were digging a hole for ourselves. And we have to reverse that trend. We have to get back on the job creation front. I think lowering energy costs is a big part of it. I think making a commitment that people believe will be honored in transportation and school reformation is going to be a big part of keeping some of the big companies we have here and even getting them to expand here as opposed to move or expand elsewhere. So I felt obligated to tell people what I want to do. Let's go back to the budget. $3.4 billion structural deficit. You knew, I knew this was coming years ago. We had a governor who wasn't really serious about cutting the size of government. She would make noises about it, but never really terribly serious about it. We had Democrats in the legislature who, in my opinion, were also not serious about living within their means. One wouldn't raise taxes, one wouldn't cut government. They compromised year after year after year, and who's paying the price? We are. And I think that was a problem. And that's why, and I've been saying this for years, the first thing I will do if I'm elected governor, you get sworn in on January 5th, I raise my right hand, I take my oath. After that, I'm invited to give a speech. I will not give that speech until I sign an executive order requiring GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, be applied in Connecticut by all of my commissions, departments, and agencies. And I've gone a step further. What I've also taken the pledge to do is to sign no budget in the spring until there is a law in the state of Connecticut passed and that I've signed that requires GAAP financing rules be applied and adhered to by the state of Connecticut. Because after all, the state of Connecticut requires every other governmental entity, Board of Ed or city, to comply with GAAP, and that it exempts itself. Why is that important? Because we had people running around talking about having a surplus when there was no surplus. We talked about having money in a rainy day fund even though our current structural deficit was greater than the rainy day fund. These are games that people were playing. No one was speaking the truth or the same language. There was no transparency. So whatever I do will be designed on the budgetary side to be structural and systemic change. So that's number one. Number two, we're going to examine every expense. You know, we have about $5.3 billion in tax expenditures. That means things we don't tax that we would otherwise tax, but we figure they do something good for us, so we won't do it. About 3 million of that is business-related loopholes. That's what it is. And the presumption is that they create jobs. Well, many of them don't, and many of them make no sense. And we're going to go through that. In fact, I already have people going through that. Why? Because if we eliminated just 25% of those, that's $750 million. And no one is doing results-based accounting or review. And so the other structural change, and I use the tax expenditures loopholes is the way to explain it, is every dime we spend should be measured on a regular basis against the mission that we're spending it on. Does the expenditure of this dollar actually accomplish what it was designed to do? And in government, if it doesn't do that, the program should go away. And even on the tax side or the loophole side, if it doesn't create jobs, then it should go away. Because otherwise we're just giving people money that we don't need to give them. Understand also that the totality of that $5.3 billion in tax expenditures represents 21% of the budget if it was budgeted, but it's offline. So it's gigantic. I mean, there are other things. We don't require the use of generics under Medicaid. It is estimated that if we require generics when they're available, so it's the same drug, just under a different name, frequently made by the same supplier, we would save $21 million. It makes no sense that we're not doing that in a time of strife, in a time when we're facing the greatest economic challenges of our life. 12 community colleges, each one operating on a different IT platform, paying different licensure fees. Each one of them operating on a different labor management system, paying different licensing fees. They need to be coordinated. We need to get that all down to one. You look at the 4 colleges, universities in the system. Each one of them has their own governance structure on the campus. And then you have this gigantic structure in the middle overseeing those 4 schools. We got to squeeze that management down and out. We have to lower management expenses. If you look at what's happened in Connecticut government over the last 20 years, there's only 2 areas of growth. Corrections, because I think in some senses we wrongly pursued an attitude that as long as we built prisons, we would take care of our problems. We pursued that at the same time that we were closing treatment beds for alcohol addiction, drug addiction, and mental illness. So we took people who we might have lent a hand to for 30 days or 60 days or 90 or 120-day course of treatment, and we traded it in for a sentence of 5 to 7 at a substantial premium per year. Makes no sense. The other part of government that grew, and it's the only other part of government that grew, was management. We now have over 7,000 state employees who are outside of the civil service system, directing the efforts of other individuals. Now, some of them work in colleges and universities as professors, so we'll exempt those. We're still talking about 5,000 people. It's outrageous. I have specifically studied DSS, DCF, and DOT. And each one of those agencies operates with, as near as we can figure out from the data we're getting, 7 layers of management above the civil service position. 7. A modern organization should, that needs to be flattened down to 3. And in flattening it down to 3, you need to make yourself more efficient. You need to get rid of some of those positions. We're not talking about lifetime people. We're not talking about civil servants. We're talking about people that have been put in these jobs in many cases for political purposes. There's a story that's been covered by another newspaper that indicated that a bus driver was hired to be an agricultural inspector because her daughter worked for the current chief of staff. Believe me, we're looking for those kinds of things.